Something small happens. A message goes unanswered for longer than usual. A comment in a meeting lands differently than you expected. A plan falls through, or a project hits a snag, or someone's tone carries a quality you can't quite read. And the emotional response is bigger than the event warrants. Much bigger. The kind of response that if you described the event to someone else and then described how you feel, they would look at you with mild confusion. Because the proportion is off. And you know that.
That's the particular frustration of this experience. It is not happening in ignorance. You can see with reasonable clarity that the response is disproportionate, that the thought running through your mind is probably not accurate, that the catastrophe you are currently constructing in your head has not actually happened, and is, in objective terms, unlikely to. You know this, and you feel what you feel anyway. The gap between what you know and what you feel, the specific frustration of rational awareness failing to do anything about emotional experience, is what this episode is about. Because the reason the gap exists is not what most people think. It is not a failure of willpower, not a deficit of rationality, not evidence that you are somehow less capable of managing your mind than other people appear to be. It is a pattern, a specific, documentable, universal pattern in human thinking. A pattern that produces predictable suffering in predictable ways, and that can be understood, named, and changed. Not quickly, not completely, but genuinely. Starting with the recognition that what your mind just told you about that event was not a fact. It was an interpretation. And interpretations can be wrong.
In the 1960s, a psychiatrist named Aaron Beck was treating patients for depression. He was trained in psychoanalytic methods, the prevailing approach of the era, and expected to find what the theory predicted: unconscious conflicts, repressed material, deep drives being expressed through symptoms. What he found instead was something more immediate and more accessible. His patients were not primarily suffering from unconscious material. They were suffering from their thoughts. Specifically, from a consistent, recurring pattern of thoughts that interpreted neutral or ambiguous situations in negative terms. Thoughts that ran so automatically and so quickly that the patients often barely noticed them, accepting them as accurate descriptions of reality, rather than as one possible interpretation among many.
Beck called these automatic thoughts, and he noticed with increasing precision that they clustered into specific recurring patterns. Patterns that were not random, that followed predictable structures, that appeared across patients and contexts and circumstances, and that produced predictable forms of emotional suffering. He called these patterns cognitive distortions. And what he had found, without knowing it at the time, was a formal, clinically rigorous version of something Epictetus had described 2,000 years earlier. That suffering is not produced by events. It is produced by interpretations of events. And that those interpretations, however automatic, however convincing, however much they feel like simple descriptions of reality, are not reality. They are the mind's rendition of reality. And renditions can be inaccurate. This is the foundational insight of cognitive behavioral therapy. And it is, word for word, the foundational insight of Stoic psychology. And it is, in practice, one of the most powerful things a man can understand about his own inner life. Let me describe the model precisely, because understanding it clearly is the prerequisite for using it. Between an event and an emotional response,
there is always a thought. This sounds simple. It is, in fact, a significant claim. When something happens, the message goes unanswered, the plan falls through, the comment lands wrong, it does not directly produce a feeling. There is a mediating step. The event is perceived, the perception is interpreted. The interpretation produces the feeling. The interpretation is the thought. And the thought happens so quickly, often in less than a second, below the threshold of conscious attention, that most people experience the event and the feeling as directly connected, as if the event produced the feeling automatically, inevitably, the way striking a match produces a flame. It does not. The thought is always there, in the middle. This matters enormously because of what follows from it. If events directly produced feelings, then the only way to change the feeling would be to change the event. And most of the events in our lives are not within our control to change.
But if thoughts produce feelings, if the interpretation is the mechanism, then the feeling can be changed by changing the interpretation. And the interpretation, unlike the event, is potentially within our reach. This is why Beck's insight was such a significant development in the treatment of depression and anxiety. It located the intervention point in something accessible, not in unconscious material that required years of excavation, in thoughts, specific, examinable, challengeable thoughts.
And Epictetus had said the same thing, with the same clarity, in a different century. Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. The word he used, opinions, is the Greek doxa, interpretations, judgments, the specific way the mind renders what has happened into meaning. Not the event, the opinion about the event.
Beck and his colleagues, working over decades, identified and documented the most common patterns of distorted thinking. Not unusual pathological patterns, common ones. Patterns present in varying degrees in virtually every human mind. The clinical language calls them cognitive distortions. The simpler description? The specific ways your mind lies to you. Not maliciously. The distortions are not a defect. They are features of a mind shaped by evolution to prioritize threat detection, social belonging, and rapid interpretation of ambiguous situations. In many ancestral contexts, a mind that assumed the worst about ambiguous information was more likely to survive than one that assumed the best.
In the context of modern life, where most of the threats are social and psychological rather than physical, the same patterns produce mostly unnecessary suffering. Here are the 6 that affect men most consistently and most significantly. Catastrophizing is the tendency to predict the worst possible outcome of an ambiguous or negative situation and to treat that outcome as certain or near certain. One critical email from a manager becomes evidence that the job is in danger. One conflict in a relationship becomes evidence that it is irreparably damaged. The mind moves from the specific, manageable problem to the worst possible extrapolation and settles there, treating the extrapolation as the most likely reality.
The emotional consequence is anxiety and despair, disproportionate to what has actually happened, because the mind is not responding to the event. It is responding to the catastrophe it has constructed from the event. All or nothing thinking, also called black and white thinking, is the tendency to evaluate situations, people, or the self in absolute terms, with no gradation between the poles. If a project is not a complete success, it is a failure. If a relationship is not fully satisfying, it is worthless. If one's performance falls short of a standard, one is incompetent. The emotional consequence is the inability to hold complexity, to recognize that most situations, most people, and most performances exist in the nuanced middle ground between perfect and catastrophic. The man who thinks in all or nothing terms finds himself in a world of extremes, constantly cycling between unrealistic idealism and unnecessary despair.
Mind reading is the tendency to assume knowledge of what others are thinking, specifically, to assume they are thinking negatively about you, without evidence sufficient to support the assumption. The partner who seems distant is judged to be angry. The colleague who was brief in a meeting is judged to be disapproving. The friend who didn't respond quickly is judged to have lost interest. The emotional consequence is an interpersonal world full of implied rejection and disapproval that largely exists in the mind rather than in reality. Relationships are experienced as subtly hostile or indifferent, even when they are not. Personalization is the tendency to assume that external events, particularly others' behavior, are caused by or directed at the self, without adequate evidence. Someone is having a difficult day and is irritable. It must be something I did. The project didn't succeed. I'm responsible. The group dynamic shifted. I must have done something wrong. The emotional consequence is a constant, overinflated sense of causal responsibility for events that often have nothing to do with you, accompanied by the guilt, shame, and anxiety this falsely attributed responsibility produces. Emotional reasoning is perhaps the most pervasive. The treatment of feelings as facts. I feel like a failure. Therefore, I am failing. I feel that she is angry. Therefore, she is angry. I feel that this situation is dangerous. Therefore, it is. The internal feeling state becomes evidence about external reality, regardless of whether any other evidence supports it. The emotional consequence is a reality that is constructed primarily from emotional states, rather than from actual observation. A reality that is, therefore, systematically biased toward whatever emotional state the man is currently in. In a bad mood, the world confirms the bad mood. In a state of anxiety, the world is threatening. The feeling is mistaken for information. Overgeneralization is the tendency to draw broad conclusions from single or limited instances. One mistake is interpreted as evidence of a general pattern of incompetence. One rejection is taken as evidence of general undesirability. One failure becomes proof of a permanent characteristic. The emotional consequence is the rapid extrapolation of specific, limited experiences into global and permanent self-assessments, often negative ones, that the actual evidence does not support. Before continuing, this needs to be said clearly. The patterns described above are not unique to people who are struggling psychologically. They are not evidence of disorder or weakness or a mind that is working incorrectly. They are universal. They appear with variations in frequency and intensity in virtually every human mind that has been studied. The difference between a person who suffers significantly from these patterns and one who does not is not the presence or absence of the patterns. It is awareness of them.
The man who has never been told that the thought following an ambiguous event is an interpretation rather than a fact takes his thoughts as direct reports on reality. Of course he does. They feel that way. They arrive automatically, with conviction, often in the same tone and texture as accurate observations. The man who has been told, who has been given the framework, who can now recognize the pattern in the moment it's running, has a fundamentally different relationship to the same automatic thought. Not this is reality, but this is a thought. What kind of thought? Possibly a catastrophe. Possibly mind reading. Is it accurate?
That pause, that movement from automatic acceptance to examination is everything. It does not require certainty about the answer. It does not require the thought to be immediately proved wrong. It simply requires the recognition that the thought is a thought and not a fact. And that recognition, once established, changes the entire inner landscape.
Epictetus wrote in the 1st century AD from the position of a freed slave who would become one of the most influential philosophers in the ancient world. His writing was not abstract. It was practical, often blunt, occasionally confrontational. He was not interested in philosophical elegance. He was interested in what actually helped people live better lives. And the most important thing he taught, the thing he returned to repeatedly across his lectures and his manual, was a single insight. Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. For example, death is nothing terrible, for if it were, it would have seemed so to Socrates. This is not a comforting platitude. It is a precise philosophical diagnosis.
The same event, a loss, a rejection, a setback, produces entirely different responses in different people, not because they are experiencing different events, but because they are interpreting them differently. The death of a great man might be experienced as tragedy by those who loved him, and as a philosophical passage by Socrates himself, who reportedly spent his last hours in calm conversation. The event is the same. The opinion, the interpretation is different. And the suffering follows from the opinion, not from the event. Epictetus's implication is clear and demanding. If suffering follows from interpretation, and if interpretation is something we have the capacity to examine and potentially change, then we have more power over our suffering than we ordinarily assume.
Not complete power. Not the ability to interpret away genuine loss, or to think our way out of grief. Epictetus was not teaching emotional bypassing. He was teaching something more fundamental. The recognition that the automatic interpretation is not the only possible one. That before accepting the opinion the mind has supplied, a man can pause, examine it, ask whether it is accurate, consider alternative interpretations. This is cognitive behavioral therapy in philosophical form, 2,000 years before CBT existed.
One more thing worth naming, because it is the frustration that the episode opened with. Understanding the cognitive model does not immediately eliminate the distorted thoughts. Knowing that a thought is a catastrophization does not make it feel less urgent. The emotional response still arrives, often before the examination can take place. This is not a failure of the framework. It is a fact about how the mind works. The automatic thoughts are faster than the examination. The feelings they produce arrive immediately. The rational assessment follows, slowly, in a different register, carrying less immediate visceral weight than the feeling it is trying to evaluate.
This is why the practice of identifying cognitive distortions is not a technique that produces instant relief.
It is a capacity that is built over time through repeated application, gradually inserting a pause between the automatic thought and the automatic acceptance of the thought. The pause starts small. You notice the feeling first, the disproportionate response. Then, with practice, you begin to notice the thought that preceded it. Then, with more practice, you begin to notice the pattern of the thought, the specific distortion at work. Then, finally, you begin to examine it before accepting it as reality. Each of these is a different stage. Each takes time to develop. None of them eliminates the automatic thoughts, but they change the relationship to those thoughts, gradually and genuinely. From a mind that is at the mercy of its interpretations to a mind that examines them. That is not a small change. It is, in practice, one of the most significant changes available. Here is the practice, stated simply. The next time a strong negative emotional response arrives, the disproportionate reaction, the feeling that something is much worse than it probably is, pause before accepting the thought that accompanied it. Not to suppress it, not to argue with it immediately, just to pause and ask 3 questions. First, is this a fact or is this an interpretation? Not, is this feeling real? The feeling is always real. But is the thought that produced the feeling a description of what actually happened, or is it one possible reading of what happened?
In most cases of significant emotional distress, the thought is an interpretation. Something ambiguous has been read in a specific, usually negative way. The question reveals this. Second, what is the evidence for and against this interpretation? Not what does it feel like. What does the actual available evidence say? The message went unanswered for 3 hours. Is that evidence of anger? What else might explain it? What would a neutral observer say? Third, what would a calmer version of me think about this same event? Not a deluded, falsely positive version. A calmer, more resourced version. What would that version notice that the current version is missing? These 3 questions are not guaranteed to produce immediate relief. They are guaranteed, over time, to produce a different relationship to your own thinking. A relationship in which the thought is not the final word, in which the interpretation is a starting point for inquiry rather than a conclusion. And that relationship, the capacity to examine your own thinking rather than simply be subject to it, is what Epictetus was pointing toward. The mind that examines its opinions is already free from some of their power. Not completely, not permanently, but genuinely. One examined thought at a time. Come back to where we started. The small event, the large response. The specific frustration of knowing the proportion is wrong and being unable to change it through knowing. That frustration is now explicable. The thought arrived before the examination. The interpretation was accepted before it was questioned. The feeling followed from an opinion the mind generated automatically, quickly and convincingly. An opinion that bore all the hallmarks of a factual report and was, in fact, a pattern. Catastrophizing, all or nothing, mind reading, emotional reasoning. These are not disorders. They are human. They are the mind doing what the mind does. Pattern matching, threat detecting, interpreting ambiguity with the biases evolution and experience have provided. They become problems
only when they are invisible. Name them, and they become patterns. Patterns that can be seen. Patterns that can be examined. Patterns that can, gradually, be interrupted. Epictetus named the same patterns with a single word: opinions, and drew the same conclusion. The suffering lives in the opinion, and the opinion is ours to examine. Aaron Beck built a clinical system for doing this, documented its effectiveness across thousands of patients, and gave us the vocabulary. You now have both. The next thought that produces disproportionate suffering is not just a feeling. It is a hypothesis. Examine it. Here's the one thing worth carrying. Your thoughts are not reality. They are interpretations, and interpretations can be wrong. The event is not the suffering. The opinion about the event is the suffering. And the opinion, unlike the event, is yours to examine. 3 questions, 1 pause. Is this a fact, or is this an interpretation? Start there. I'll see you in the next one.